Today we're going to talk about the principles of decision making. Now, this is not purely a science topic. We make decisions every day, and being thoughtful and deliberate about how we do it can help us make better decisions. So we're going to look at 4 different principles of decision making: cost-benefit analysis, the precautionary principle, wait and see, and intuition. Now, cost-benefit analysis can also be called risk-benefit analysis. And this is a principle where you list the costs or the risks involved and you list the benefits involved. Costs can be monetary, some price that something is, or it can be risk, some negative impact that might happen if you do this thing. Benefits would be the positive impacts that happen if you do this thing. And anybody looking at the same problem should be able to come up with pretty much the same list of costs and risks and of benefits. So that part is very data-driven. But ultimately, in the end, you need to weigh those two and make a decision based on which is more important. And that's where individual values can come in. You might decide that one thing really stands out, and that's why you want to make a decision in one way or another. A second important principle for making decisions is called the precautionary principle. And the precautionary principle doesn't give you any leeway to make a decision. The precautionary principle says that if there is a lack of scientific information, to make certain that there will be no negative impacts. Does that make sense? If there is not enough scientific information to be certain that there will be no negative impacts, then you must not do this thing. It protects very strongly against potential negative impacts on the environment, and it doesn't allow you the option of weighing what those potential negative impacts must be. If you're invoking the precautionary principle, then you will say no if there's any possibility of a negative outcome. The precautionary principle arose out of the famous book by Rachel Carson in 1962 called Silent Spring. Rachel Carson started the environmental movement in the United States by opening up the chapter of DDT spraying and its effect on the environment. DDT is a chemical that used to be used to kill agricultural pests and mosquitoes, and it was very effective in that regard. But it also caused substantial negative harm to the environment. It killed a lot of birds, which is why the title becomes Silent Spring. And it had impacts all the way up the food chain. DDT has been banned in the US after this book, and the precautionary principle arose because of it. DDT was allowed to be used in spite of some precaution that maybe there might be some negative impacts down the road. Those negative impacts weren't fully understood, and they went ahead and approved the use of DDT. And the end result was a disaster. So that's where the precautionary principle arose as the hallmark of the environmental decision making. Another decision is to wait and see. Now, that doesn't sound like much of a decision. You might say that's just a non-decision, but in fact it is a choice. Many politicians today are using the wait and see philosophy with regards to climate change. They agree with scientists that climate change is happening and that humans have caused it, but they're unwilling right now to take any steps about it. They want to wait and see what the consequences are before they make a decision. The choice to wait and see is in itself a decision. Finally, we come to intuition, faith, personal belief. We make a lot of decisions in our lives based on intuition or our own personal belief system, and that's a wonderful way to make a lot of kinds of decisions. Now, Einstein probably wasn't talking about faith so much in this quote. He was talking about the kind of intuition that leads to breakthroughs in science and in other disciplines. When you're very well educated and knowledgeable in a particular field, intuition is insight of creative thinking that leads often to a new direction and often to a great new discovery, which Einstein, of course, was famous for. So we can build a grid that looks at these decision-making principles on a 4-point scale between beliefs and data, and between personal choosing and letting the philosophy dictate the choice. And on that scale, the precautionary principle shows up in the upper right-hand corner. It is based on data, and the philosophy tells you what to do. You don't get to choose. Cost-benefit analysis is heavily data-driven, and the philosophy dictates some of that, but you must make a choice in the end based on the data that you compile, what direction you're going to move. Wait and see is something that the philosophy is deciding. You're not making a choice to move in one direction or another. You might be looking at data, you might be listening to your belief system, but you're letting the philosophy of wait and see dictate what to do. You're not moving. And intuition shows up down here in the lower left, where you're letting your beliefs lead to your choice. Of course, there's this huge middle ground, and a lot of decision making happens here. We might use a little bit of cost-benefit analysis, but let some of our intuition drive it. We might use a risk-benefit analysis, but decide to wait a little while before we move forward. This middle ground is where a lot of decisions are made. What's really important when you're making an important decision is to be thoughtful and deliberate about it, to know how you're making that decision and why you've chosen that philosophy to make the decision with will help you make better decisions in the long run.